From automobile sales to home appliances and travel, consumer spending is helping drive the world's two largest economies. We'll discuss the latest economic numbers and expectations for the year ahead. Hello, everyone. I'm Asiye Namdar, and you're watching The Heat. As China celebrates Spring Festival and the Year of the Snake, there's some optimism about the recovery of the global economy. China's gross domestic product, or GDP, grew 5% in 2024, with the country pursuing high-quality development, green energy, consumer spending, and further opening up. The United States closed last year with 2.3% GDP growth. Consumer spending also helped keep the economy humming. The U.S. Federal Reserve announced a pause in interest rate cuts this week, describing the economy as strong. The European Central Bank, though, announced more interest rate cuts for the Eurozone. The bloc's largest countries, France and Germany, are still struggling with high inflation and little to no growth. For more on the global economy, expectations this year, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Portland, Oregon is Liang. She's a chair professor of economics at Willamette University. Also with us from New York, Anthony Chan, a former chief economist for J.P. Chase Morgan. From London, Klisman Murati is the founder of Pareto Economics and creator of the Global Power Index. And John Gong, professor of economics at University of International Business and Economics. Welcome to you all. John, let me begin with you. China hits its annual growth target for 2024. The economy grew 5% year on year. That's according to government statistics. Your thoughts on China's performance, economic performance in 2024, and expectations for 2025?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I think that the goal was finally achieved by the end of the year is something not so easy. This is as a result of the massive stimulus package introduced during the last quarter, or actually the beginning of the last quarter of last year. And eventually, the fourth quarter numbers showed to be pretty strong. So I think overall, we still had a fairly difficult year last year in 2024, but eventually we pulled it off and were able to achieve that goal. Now, looking forward, I think China's economy has bottomed out. I think it's safe to make that conclusion after a very difficult year last year. And I think from now on, things are turning for the better. And hopefully, I think the next quarter will be continuing this momentum. And at least I think during the Spring Festival, the numbers that I've seen are still pretty good. So I think, we're probably going to have a fairly decent quarter for the first quarter of 2024.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about Spring Festival and its economic impact in a moment. Jan, let's talk about consumer spending. In 2024, more than 6 million vehicles and more than 56 million home appliances were sold under China's trade program. Consumer spending is huge in any economy. Talk about consumer spending and its implication, if you will, in revitalizing China's economy.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Asiye. So yes, I think consumer spending will be very important. In 2024, consumer spending accounts for about over 50% of the GDP growth. And the year before, it was domestic consumption and public consumption totally account for over 85% of the growth in 2023. So that just shows that the consumer spending is really important in driving forward the economy. So I think in 2025, the government has already decided that they're going to continue with the trade-in program that you just mentioned, which is basically a Chinese version of the cash for clunk kind of policy. And they expanded the category that are eligible to this kind of trade-in program. Previously is mostly, cars and your household appliances. And now it also expands to, smartwatches, electronics, and iPads and phones and so on and so forth. They already budget for another 81 billion yuan to start, $81 billion to start to finance the kinds of project, and that is very likely to continue to expand. So I think, the policymaker has made stimulating domestic demand as their top policy priority, I think rightly so, in this year. Partly because, again, China is a very large economy. It relies mostly on the domestic consumption and domestic, investment demand. But also, as we know, with Trump in office the second time, it's very likely that trade tensions may ratchet up. And so I think China really need to brace for that external uncertainty and really trying to bolster domestic demand to cope with that.
Yeah, so many uncertainties under President Trump, which brings me here to the United States. The U.S. Federal Reserve held interest rates steady this week, keeping the benchmark rate between 4.25% and 4.5%. Donald Trump has said he would demand lower rates. He said he would talk about this to Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Here is Jerome Powell's reaction. I want you all to take a listen.
I'm not going to have any response or comment whatsoever on what the president said. It's not appropriate for me to do so. The public should be confident that we will continue to do our work as we always have, focusing on using our tools to achieve our goals and really keeping our heads down and doing our work, and that's how we best serve the public.
Anthony, what do you make of what Jerome Powell had to say, and does President Trump have any kind of influence over the central bank and the important decisions that it makes?
Well, Asiye, thank you for having me. I just finished writing a Substack article on the pressure that presidents have put on the Federal Reserve throughout the years. And it's nothing new. I mean, Lyndon Johnson did it with William Chesney Martin when he was Fed chair. Richard Nixon did it with Arthur Burns. And now, of course, you heard Donald Trump in the first administration putting a lot of pressure on Jerome Powell. And now in the second term of the Trump administration doing it again. But as you heard Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, say, their job is to pursue their dual mandate, and that is to keep stable prices and stable employment and economic growth. And as you said at the beginning of the show, we had very good growth in the fourth quarter. We had 2.3% economic growth in the fourth quarter, but for the year it was 2.8%. And right now, for the first quarter, I think that we could get growth as much as 3%. Keep in mind that potential growth is somewhere around 1.8%. So if you can grow the economy more than 1% above potential growth, that economy is pretty strong. And in that kind of an environment, lowering interest rates has to be something that only happens if you are experiencing stable prices or prices that are at the targeted level. And we just saw that if you look at core personal consumption deflator, that came in above the target. Not a lot, but certainly above the target. When you see inflation inching up almost 3% on a year-over-year basis, when you look at core PCE, that tells you, yes, the Federal Reserve can afford to lower interest rates in 2025, but they can't rush to do so. It'll be a real challenge to say we demand that interest rates go down when economic growth is so strong.
You know, a lot of people are still not buying homes and cars, Anthony. I mean, do we need to forget about the days where the interest rates were as low as 2 and 3%? Are those days basically over?
Well, you can never say things are over forever and ever, but for now, when you have inflation that's just slightly below 3%, and the Federal Reserve is trying to reach inflation of 2%, they're going to keep monetary policy somewhat restrictive, not overly restrictive, but restrictive. And that's why you have mortgage rates that are near 7%. Keep in mind that any of the interest-sensitive sectors, whether it be housing or autos, they're going to remain under pressure because those are the two sectors that the Federal Reserve impacts directly in a manner to reach their targeted goals. The other parts of the economy are not as sensitive to interest rates, and so they're doing well. But you're absolutely right. You're seeing this pressure on the housing market, and you saw it with some of the housing numbers. But keep in mind that supply in housing is still restricted, and that's why when you look at Case-Shiller, perhaps the best way of measuring housing prices are still going up. They're not collapsing.
All right, well, let me move on to Europe's economy, which is struggling. The European Central Bank announced another cut in interest rates this week, the fifth, in fact, since June of 2024, to ease the cost of borrowing. Let's listen to Christine Lagarde, the European Central Bank president.
The economy stagnated in the fourth quarter, according to Eurostat's preliminary flash estimate. It is set to remain weak in the near term. Surveys indicate that manufacturing continues to contract, while services activity is expanding. Consumer confidence is fragile, and households have not yet drawn sufficient encouragement from rising real incomes to significantly increase their spending. Nevertheless, the conditions for a recovery remain in place.
So we heard what Christine Lagarde has to say. European economy in the Eurozone remains stagnant. Consumer confidence is not where it needs to be. Klisman, are these interest rate cuts, do they go far enough? Your take on what needs to happen?
There's only so much the central bank can do to revive the economy in Europe. That's the one thing we have to realize. What keeps people motivated in an economy is both fiscal policy and also regulation. And in both of these cases in Europe and also the UK, we've seen the Eurozone going in the wrong direction for these two main things. Now, this is something that needs to be addressed and focused on. But given how expansive the European Union is and the bureaucracy within the European Union, I don't see how they can reverse this trend for them to be able to increase economic growth, because the growth drivers in Europe are very minimal. AI and technology seem to be one of them, but Europe is really much lagging behind in this as well. So this is the place that where Europe sits currently. And given when Trump starts to ramp up its activities in Europe, it can have both positive and negative consequences in Europe. More negative, I believe, than positive in the long run.
And what is the general mood among Europeans? I know you're in London. I mean, are people worried?
Well, I think everyone who can is thinking of moving somewhere else for their economic security. The UK is in a position where, despite inflation numbers being at 2.5%, many things that the CPI doesn't measure is going up. Local taxes are going up. Energy prices are going up. Incomes aren't staying up to trend with these increased in living costs as well. So this creates a malaise within the mentality and in the psyche of the people. House prices are just astronomical now as well, and they're only set to increase because housing stock still isn't keeping up with demand. And those who can afford to buy homes are buying them. Institutions are buying homes, which is leaving people renting as well. So all of the similar issues that are happening really in any developed economy, the UK and the EU is facing. Europe and the UK also do not have energy security, which is the biggest thing also. Because if they had energy security, then these costings can be subsidized by that. But they don't have this, which is why we're seeing an increase in living costs going up in both the EU and in the UK.
Wow. Well, let me move on again to the United States and all the threats, if you will, President Donald Trump has made when it comes to tariffs. I'm just curious if you all think he will follow through on his threat to impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. This could happen actually this coming weekend. Anthony, let me pose this question to you. At the end of the day, President Trump says he's punishing the economic policies by imposing these tariffs or the trade dispute between United States and Mexico and Canada. But don't tariffs actually hurt you and me, the American consumers?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the way tariffs work, is that they impose tariff on these products that are imported, and the companies raise the prices. And so the average household in the United States, if all the tariffs that were threatened were to be imposed, we're talking about increase burden of about $3,000 or more per family. These are numbers that have been estimated by nonpartisan think tanks. And already, what you're also hearing from some companies, department stores, retailers, food stores, are all talking about how much are they going to be able to pass on to the consumer and how much can they absorb. So keep in mind that if they pass them on to the consumer, that means higher inflation. If they absorb them, that means lower profit margins and lower profits. So that means lower stock prices, which in turn means a negative wealth effect. So tariffs are never a good thing for the countries, and they're never a good thing for consumers or even shareholders. But nonetheless, Many of these tariffs are a negotiating ploy. In fact, we're hearing in the United States that the hope and expectation is that somehow these countries will make enough concessions that these tariffs won't go into place. Keep in mind, Asier, that during the campaign, they were talking about 60% tariffs on China, and now what you're hearing more and more is a 10% tariff. So again, they're looking for concessions from the countries involved, whether it be Europe, whether it be China, whether it be Mexico, whether it be Canada. And the more the concessions are made, the smaller the tariffs, if any at all, will be imposed.
Well, let me move on to John. And John, as you heard what Anthony just said, and we've heard it from Donald Trump himself, that he's still weighing that 10% tariff on China. But we're getting mixed messages from the president. At the World Economic Forum, he also said, we look forward, and I'm quoting here, we look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. If Trump does go ahead with more tariffs, could that perhaps backfire? What are the risks? I know a lot of questions for you. And then how is China likely to respond?
Well, first of all, I think Donald Trump's attitude towards tariff is more than just using this as a sort of a leveraging tool to deal with another country for political gain or for strategic or geopolitical gain. I think it's more than that. I think he is really buying to this new economic theory that the tariff can be potentially used as an alternative revenue source. He mentioned his inauguration speech that he's going to establish an external revenue service. I think he really lends the ears to his Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick, that this is indeed a viable solution for the deficit problem. As economists, we all think about this as something really ridiculous heresy. It's not going to work. But nevertheless, I think he really believes that he is going to do this big social experiment, that he's going to resort to tariffs as an alternative to government revenue. At the same time, trying to rebuild American industrial and manufacturing base. I think that's his idea. Nevertheless, we all believe that it's not going to work. Now, when it comes to China, you raised this question about China. I think 10% are a subset of exports to the United States compared to 25 new tariffs on Mexican and Canadian exports to the United States. It's actually not bad for China, and I think it's probably in Trump's mind that it's not bad for China too. As well, I think he is banking on initially developing a fairly amicable relationship with China, with President Xi, in order to help him solve the Ukraine problem. And he put this very clearly in one of the tweets he put out that China and the United States work together to help solve this Ukraine problem. I think that's where he's coming from. So I think against that backdrop, 10% tariff probably in his mind is not, going to be interpreted as a strong insult to China, at least according to him, I guess. Nevertheless, my guess is that the Chinese government's response is also going to be quite measured. It's actually not bad at all, much better than the 60% tariff you used to talk about. So I would imagine that China probably is not going to have a huge response, possible 10% tariff on a subset of exports from China to the United States.
Jan, do you agree with that? And at the end of the day, these are the biggest economies in the world, and they got to find some common ground here to work together economically on a number of other issues as well.
Right. So I think if we look at the past experience in Trump 1.0, China did have swift retaliation on the US's tariff. So I think at this point, even with 10%, I think China will signal that there will be some sort of tit for tat, but maybe not. I agree with John. It's not going to be massive. It's not going to be too sort of aggressive kinds of retaliation. And I think China always understands that tariff war produces lose-lose situation. So if they do have any sort of retaliation, it will be very targeted. However, I also, agree with John. I think that 10% is maybe just a teaser, right? Because we know that Donald Trump has all these domestic priorities, even with the 25% of tariff on the two largest trading partner of the United States. By the way, this is $1.6 trillion trade that we're talking about. And I think, he talked about this tariff is mostly to make these two countries cooperate on immigration issues and sentiment issues. And these are, really his top domestic priorities right now. And I think dealing with China, he has a time for it. He's probably thinking, the time, the scale, and also the scope of the tariff. And he's also probably thinking about China's retaliation methods and how this would affect the United States, and also seeing, China's reactions if China is able to, come up with some sort of compromise on trade issues. And I think John also really clearly point out the Ukraine-Russia situations and so on and so forth. So I think, China is always, hoping for the best, but also preparing for the worst. And as, Graham Allison, the former Secretary of Defense, talked about, Assistant Secretary, said that, we need to take Donald Trump's words seriously, but not literally. So I think, in a way, China is preparing to both, in a way, Trump-proof its economy, but also, in a way, cope with all these specific actions coming from the United States to deter any further aggression. So I think, the whole world is basically, I think, is really watching very closely and preparing for the next move.
Yeah, you got to wonder what the Europeans are thinking. Klisman, what does the EU, what do they want to see from Donald Trump?
I think one thing where both the EU and the US agree on is the need for Europe to have alternative sources of energy. Now, since the invasion of Ukraine, Europe has faced many difficulties for its energy security. The United States under Trump has wanted and will want to increase its exports of LNG into Europe. And he's pushing against an open door here because Europe wants to receive this LNG and they want to wean themselves off of Russian energy. This is one area where I think they can cooperate very, very well on. And if this comes to be, and if this is strengthened throughout the 4 years that Trump is in office, I think Europe's energy security needs will be much more met. It'll phase out Russia, and hopefully this will give them the ability to have lower energy costs, which will hopefully incentivize a new growth circuit in Europe, because energy costs are one of the primary factors which determines how healthy an economy is in the long run. So that's one area which I think they can work on together, minus other tariffs and minus other things that Trump may expect from Europe, i.e. raising NATO's contribution, the European Union's contribution into NATO up to 5%, which will eat into government budgets. But if we're looking at the positives here, I think lowering the cost of energy, having more energy security, and working together with the United States in this sector is going to be key for Europe, and I think it will lead to success for Europe's energy sector in the long run.
All right, I want to switch gears and talk about artificial intelligence. Boy, what a stunning, just unbelievable week it's been for Chinese-made AI app DeepSeek, basically taking Wall Street and the world by surprise, became the most downloaded free app application on Apple Store. This is just unbelievable. Turning to be a formidable challenger to OpenAI's ChatGPT, but it was produced at a fraction of the cost. Jan, let me move to you. How much of a boost is this for China?
Well, I think it really showcased that despite all the sanctions on the high-end chips to China, China is still able to make tremendous progress in the AI space. And I think this is a big sort of boost to the confidence, but also in a way, it really shake out the entire tech world. We looked at the United States, the financial sector, the stock market basically took a hard hit when the DeepSeek was launched and making a lot of sort of fanfare. But I think, going forward, I still believe that the AI space needs more cooperation. And I think China is really playing a lead role in making this open source technology, really trying to sort of share the technologies and in a way bridge the sort of AI gap around the world. And I think it's also very important because collaboration is not only about technological advancement, but more importantly on the governance issue. And I think that really requires countries to come together and set up some of the basic sort of ground rule, right, to apply AI as a force of good instead of using it, for some very catastrophic sort of applications. And I also think that, again, China presents a very interesting model where you don't have to have billions of dollars to invest in this area to be able to make these kinds of technological advancements. And I think that really provides a lot more opportunities going forward. And I think also China is not only making progress in terms of the AI, in terms of the foundational models, but also I think the applications, the commercialization prospects are also very promising. So we'll see, how China is able to, move on to the next stage.
Yeah, John, before I move on to Spring Festival, I just want to get your reaction to DeepSeek. And President Trump basically said this is a wake-up call for America and the tech industry. Are you surprised by his reaction?
Well, I think it's more than a wake-up for America. I think it's a wake-up call for the entire AI community. I think, the biggest lesson I get away from this is that I used to buy into the theory. It's the myth or the conventional wisdom that AI is going to need a lot of investment, hundreds of billions of dollars. You need big data centers. You need a lot of electricity. You need a lot of computational power. A lot of GPU chips. Remember, just a few weeks ago, President Trump was summoning these three big businessmen talking about $500 billion, infrastructure, so-called AI infrastructure investment. I think the biggest significance of this event coming from China is that it just debunks the myth that it needs a lot of money. And that you can actually do it with a lot less. You don't need, this huge investment in the infrastructure. So I think this is the real wake-up call. It's more than just for America. It's for the entire world, for the entire AI community. That there's a path forward that can get away with all this, preaching from the big tech companies that they are the dominant guys that steering the wheel and it needs a lot of investment behind it. That's just totally not true at all.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nervous people in California, Silicon Valley. And very quickly, John, we're running out of time. Let's talk quickly about Spring Festival. It's always such a great economic opportunity for China. People spend a lot of money. They go to movies. And this year, the box office revenue broke records. Why has this become such a big tradition during the Chinese New Year? And I guess my final question is, what movie is on your list to go and see?
Well, I think it's really a family event. I'm just guessing that a lot of people go into the theaters just enjoying themselves. The content of the movie probably doesn't matter much. I mean, everybody wants to see a good movie. But what I've read is that for a lot of families, this is the only time they go to the theaters together. So it's something like the Thanksgiving in the United States, other than it's a little longer. I mean, it's lasts about a week. After a fairly long period of essentially COVID era for the last 3 or 4 years, finally people are getting together without any constraint. The economy is doing a little bit better now. So I think it's time to enjoy ourselves. I mean, you look at the traffic number, you look at the box office numbers, they're all very encouraging. Actually, I haven't watched the movie yet. I'm actually thinking about watching a movie the next day or tomorrow. I think the early indication of the beginning of a new year in 2024 seems to be pretty good so far.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, John Gong, Anthony Chan, Klizman Morati, and Yan Liang. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington. Thank you for watching.